Welcome to Anews. I'm Livestream and you're watching Turkiye's Diplomacy. From rising tensions in the Strait of Hormuz to new energy alliances reshaping the Middle East, today's developments show how power and politics continue to define global energy routes. Iran's renewed threats over the vital waterway have reignited fears of disruption, while Washington urges NATO allies to phase out Russian oil and gas. In the region, Gaza's reconstruction and new energy deals between Israel and Egypt are redefining influence across the Arab world. And later, we'll turn to Gaza, where controversial U.S. statements, Israeli aid limits, and Washington's threats towards Hamas are once again raising questions about the West's stance on Palestinian rights.
Residents in Tehran expressed support this week towards U.S. President Donald Trump's call for dialogue with Iran.
من معتقدم که مذاکرهشون نمیتونه فریب باشه. صرفا میخوان از جنگ و خونریزی جلوگیری کنن دیگه، چون خودشون هم گفتن. یا مذاکره هستش یا جنگ دیگه، میخوان از مذاکره استفاده کنن.
U.S. President Donald Trump said in a speech to the Israeli parliament on Monday that Washington is prepared to make a deal with Iran when Tehran is ready.
من به شخص معتقدم اسرائیل هر چه که آمریکا بگه رو انجام میده، یعنی هیچ کاری بدون برنامه‌ریزی با آمریکا انجام نمیده. من اینو میتونم بگم که اگر آمریکا پای حرفش بمونه، یعنی همون جور که به حماس متعهد شدن که اگر مثلا اسرائیل بهش حمله کنه خود آمریکا با اسرائیل حمله میکنه، اگر که آمریکا یک تعهد خیلی قوی و خوب در مجامع بین المللی به ایران بده، من معتقدم که اسرائیل هم 100% پیروی میکنه، چون هیچ کاری بدون هماهنگی آمریکا نمیکنه، وابسته است 100% با آمریکا. اعتقاد من اینه.
Tehran and Washington held 5 rounds of nuclear talks prior to a 12-day war between Iran and Israel in June, which Washington joined by striking key Iranian nuclear sites. The talks faced major stumbling blocks such as the issue of uranium enrichment on Iranian soil, which Western powers want to bring down to zero to minimize any risk of weaponization, a plan that Tehran has rejected.
Yet even to Iran, whose regime has inflicted so much death on the Middle East, the hand of friendship and cooperation is open. I'm telling you, they want to make a deal. That's all I do in my life, I make deals. I'm good at it. I've always been good at it, and I know when they want.
Iran's foreign ministry on Tuesday criticized Trump's comments, accusing Washington of hostile and criminal behavior following his remarks to the Israeli parliament about being ready to strike a deal with Tehran.
Joining me in the first half of the program is Dr. John Ballas, the founder and director of Energy Straits, an Istanbul-based advisory that connects U.S. and Turkish perspectives on energy and geopolitics. John, welcome to the program. I want to first focus on the latest developments from Iran. Now, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has stressed that the Islamic Republic will not allow other countries to use the Strait of Hormuz for oil and gas shipments, while Iran itself is denied.
I can't hear anything.
Can you hear us now? We're facing a technical difficulty. We'll be right back after this news report.
Bir süredir çok farklı kanallardan yürüttüğümüz diplomasinin de katkısıyla Gazze'de varılan ateşkes mutabakatını memnuniyetle karşılıyoruz. 2 yıllık zulmün, vahşetin ve soykırımın ardından elhamdülillah Gazze'de kırılgan da olsa bir güven iklimi oluştu. İsrail'in verdiği sözleri tutmama konusundaki bozuk sicilinin herkes gibi biz de farkındayız. Bu gerçeğin Filistin Direniş Hareketi, Hamas ve Gazze'li kardeşlerimiz daha çok farkında. Ateşkes mutabakatının uygulanmasının da yakından takipçisi olacağız. Rehine ve mahkum takasıyla birlikte yeni bir aşamaya geçilmiş oldu. İnsani yardımların girişleri hızlandı. Tüm aksaklıklara rağmen 350'ye yakın tırımız Gazze'ye giriş yaptı. 400'den fazla tırımız ise giriş için bekliyor. Dün 900 ton yardım taşıyan 17. iyilik gemimizi Mersin'den bölgeye yolcu ettik. Bunun devamı da gelecek. İnşallah kış bastırmadan insani yardımlarımıza ağırlık vereceğiz.
Sorry about those technical difficulties, but joining me now in the first half of the program is Dr. John Ballas, the founder and director of Energy Straits, an Istanbul-based advisory that connects U.S. and Turkish perspectives on energy and geopolitics. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
John, firstly, I want to focus on the latest developments from Iran. Now, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has stressed that the Islamic Republic will not allow other countries to use the Strait of Hormuz for oil and gas shipments, while Iran itself is denied that right. Dr. Ballas, how might Tehran's renewed threats to the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil flows, reshape the Gulf's LNG exports?
Yeah, I mean, you're correct. 20% of oil flows through Hormuz, and 20% of LNG, roughly, almost entirely from Qatar. And this really isn't anything new. These kind of threats from Iran, they've been issued since the 1980s, and of course with more frequency, I'd say, in the last 10 to 15 years, with U.S. sanctions and kind of renewed emphasis on using sanctions and oil as a tool of U.S. policy. It's just hard to kind of get too excited about them. Number one, because they are obviously kind of shooting themselves in the foot if they were to close the straits. And number two, in terms of European, let's say, west of Suez Canal exports of LNG. Most of Qatar's gas does go to Asia, and it will be ramping up with time. They have a lot of deals on tap in 2026 to 2028, a lot of new supplies coming online. A lot of that is slated to go to Asia. So I'm very dubious that, number one, it will happen because Iran has threatened this for 4 decades now and never really done it because of the economic suicide aspects. And number two, it won't have a huge impact on Europe because Europe only gets about 12% of its LNG from Iran.
Dr. John, I also want to ask you another question about Iran and Trump. Now, at the Israeli Knesset, Donald Trump said that there is a high chance that Iran makes a deal with the United States. Do you think that's going to be possible? And I want your analysis on this. Do you think that it's necessary for Iran right now to make a deal with the United States?
Well, it's proven not necessary, I guess. Do I think it's going to happen? Of course, I think any watcher of this space would veer that will not happen. Just because we've been going on 4 decades of this. Obviously Iran is in a much more weakened position than it was compared to 2 years ago, and kind of has slowly, been its power and certainly the axis of resistance throughout the region has been weakened. Do they have to make a deal with the United States? It's debatable. It would certainly be a major boon for the region. I think Trump is, to the extent that we have to take his policy seriously in the sense that he wants, energy deals throughout the region, and certainly an open Iran could certainly usher in. We're on the verge of a very positive era for the region. It seems like many countries want to move beyond war and kind of this endless fighting. And energy is going to be a way that can happen, of course, in reconstruction of various countries in the region, but also if Iran can be brought into that commercial exchange, it's kind of a win-win for everyone, potentially.
Dr. John, now Trump is turning his attention towards the war in Ukraine, and he is insisting that NATO allies like Hungary and Slovakia phase out Russian oil and gas. How do you foresee this accelerating Europe's turn to Middle Eastern suppliers like Qatar, and what challenges could it face?
I think it's, of course, since 2022, this is a major push, to wean Europe off of Russian hydrocarbons. Both, oil is largely weaned off of, but the gas is a different story. It's been a slow process. We're now in 2025. There were aggressive moves made by the Europeans, right after February 2022 to do that. But shifting an energy supply in a system is challenging. It can't happen overnight. Trump may want it, but he can't force it. I think for two reasons. Number one, countries don't have to follow. Yes, they have the threat of U.S. sanctions and these policies, but those policies really have their limits. And I don't think we've seen Trump obviously issue threats and then kind of walk them back, or it's kind of desires, and I think it's all part of his negotiation about trying to reduce Russian hydrocarbons entering Europe, and so all these kinds of deals. I mean, really everything in the energy space in this region needs to be seen within the context of 2022 and trying to end Russia's energy imports into Europe. Of course, Russia has turned mostly to China, and it has turned east. So, this is going to sort itself out, but it's going to take time. And I don't expect these new kind of threats or desires by Trump to be affected.
Dr. John, obviously now we know that there is a ceasefire in place in Gaza and Israel has stopped attacking the Palestinians. The massacre has ended, even though there are some reports of new killings. Israel is continuing to kill the Palestinians. But, let's talk about reconstruction. Now that it's gaining momentum, what role could Arab states like Qatar and Saudi Arabia play in funding or developing the energy infrastructure there?
Well, I think quite obviously a large role. It's no secret that they have, the financial capital to invest in such reconstruction. I don't see why it has to be a competitive exercise. It seems that, both Qatar and Saudi could invest in various projects, even joint invest. I mean, their oil companies can joint invest. Energy is a nice a space where countries that maybe are rivals to some extent politically can join and meet and cooperate. And this is obviously a very necessary reason for cooperation and for investment. It's not just, clearly new energy projects and other projects are on the table, but it's, an investment in human development that can pay dividends down the line, decades down the line. So, I encourage them to work together and with the United States, with Europe, with other partners in the region, China, whoever wants to get involved. But it maybe sounds a bit naive, but business can bring a lot of partners together, I believe.
With the recent signing of the $610 million Nitzana pipeline deal to transport gas from Israel to Egypt, building on the August $35 billion expansion agreement amid Cairo's ongoing energy shortages, how might this deepen bilateral energy interdependence, especially as Egypt continues its pivotal mediation role?
Certainly helps. It's energy deals are a reflection of geopolitics, and oftentimes geopolitics guides energy deals. This is certainly a symbiotic relationship here. Of course, Israeli-Egyptian cooperation in energy is not new. I refer to Israel and Egypt as sort of its own gas nexus, really, because they're working in a complementary role to export from Egypt, produced in Israel. Of course, Egypt has its own issues. You raised about the energy crisis last year and just ongoing struggles there. And again, this fits into the whole, non-Russian supplies coming online. So, these are two countries that have received the largest amount of aid from the United States in history. So there's kind of, it's obviously not sanctioned, but supported and backed by the United States, these kinds of moves. And obviously Chevron is the partner. So, it's a deepening and intensifying of an energy relationship that works for both countries.
John, the April 2025 U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal creating a joint fund from revenues of critical resources like rare earths and titanium to offset past and without repayment positions, Ukraine as a key player in global supply chains. How beneficial is this deal for the Ukrainians?
Well, it's very hard to say at this point because this is very much a down the road payoff from such a deal. The first installment was made, I believe, in September for $75 million of investing in this project. Just kind of the start. The thing with minerals is that we need to understand is that it's not even so much that getting the minerals is important, though it is. It's refining them, where China has this strategic chokehold that they have been flexing in their trade war / negotiations with the United States recently, on Friday with their export controls initiated on rare earths. So refining requires a whole setup. It's not very commercially productive. China invested in this decades ago, and it's a dirty process. It's not easy, and this is why the West and the United States are very behind on this issue. So. It's symbolically important, of course. Again, this is a Trump policy to, make commercial deals and let diplomacy kind of follow. So that symbolism should not be lost. But how much will actually change, the actual global balances of minerals and who can get them and when, it's very much a 2030 question, I would say.
Staying with Trump, Dr. John, in August this year, the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity Agreement was announced, which granted the U.S. 99-year exclusive rights to develop the Zangezur corridor for rail, oil, gas, and fiber optics, bypassing Russian and Iranian routes. Now, this has sparked threats from Tehran. What exactly are the Iranians fearing?
Well, certainly to be kind of cut off from trade. I mean, this route, they share a border with Armenia, Iran does, and was reaching into Azerbaijan through directly, and so this kind of cuts that off. Potentially cuts off their route up north, even all the way up into Russia. So there's competition going on over trade routes. Is it high on Tehran's list of priorities? I don't know. I'm not there. It seems for now, yes, there's a threat of that. But if I were in Tehran, I would take comfort in the fact that this deal is far from concluded. It still requires a huge rail line, I think roughly 80 kilometers to be built. It also requires the Armenian parliament to pass a supermajority on it. And so, these deals, in my experience, I've looked a lot at kind of transnational, especially oil and gas pipelines, but these kinds of transnational projects are very, very tricky. Getting Armenia to fully come on board, besides just a lot of good ideas and such, is not something that's certain to happen. So I guess they're probably not worried until something like that actually gets signed and passes the Armenian parliament.
Dr. John Ballis, founder and director of Energy Straits, thank you so much for being on the program. It was a pleasure listening to your analysis.
Thank you so much.
Drone footage captured over Gaza City has revealed vast stretches of destruction, with neighborhoods flattened and infrastructure reduced to rubble after 2 years of relentless Israeli attacks.
Drone footage captured shows entire neighborhoods in Gaza City reduced to rubble. Streets are unrecognizable and once bustling markets are now just twisted metal and concrete. With a ceasefire in place, Palestinians have been returning to what remains of their homes and communities. They could be seen walking past collapsed buildings as they tried to find fragments of their past lives. The widespread destruction is hampering the return of the remaining deceased hostages to Israel. Hamas armed wing on Wednesday said it had handed over the remains it had access to. According to U.S. advisors, Hamas has assured the U.S. through intermediaries that it is working to return all dead hostages. The senior advisors said they did not believe Hamas had violated the ceasefire deal. The officials were not authorized to comment publicly and briefed reporters on the condition of anonymity. The officials also added the widespread destruction in the territory has complicated the retrieval of the dead. One of the advisors added that the debris, as well as unexploded weapons, added to the difficulty. The United Nations Development Agency says the amount of debris in Gaza would be enough to build 13 giant pyramids in Egypt. The latest joint estimate from the UN, the European Union and the World Bank is that $70 billion will be required to rebuild Gaza.
The ceasefire plan introduced by U.S. President Donald Trump had called for all hostages, living and dead, to be handed over by a deadline, which expired this Monday.
That we had the head of CENTCOM today suggest that Hamas needs to hurry up and disarm and follow your comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
That it was the head of CENTCOM saying that. Is that not a signal to Hamas, to the rest of the world, that at some point the U.S. military more directly engaged?
We won't need the U.S. military.
So then why have
We won't need it.
Why not just yield?
Because we're very much involved in it. If we weren't involved, there wouldn't be peace. If we didn't destroy the nuclear capability of Iran, that deal would have never happened for two reasons. The Arab nations would not have felt bold enough to do it because you have a very powerful, at that time, Iran. It's not powerful anymore between what Israel and us did, because, you know, the attack was, if you look at it, we helped them very much. They will be the first to tell you, including shooting down thousands of drones that were coming into Israel. You know, we shot them down.
But you still foresee no reason for the U.S. military to get involved in Gaza?
No, I don't see that. No, I think we're going to handle it very well. We'll be helping Israel. But we have other countries that are now. You know, we signed, many countries signed, and many of those countries relatively are very strong military powers. And Hamas has no support. See, Hamas had the support of Iran, and now Iran says, don't get us involved. The last time they got them involved didn't work out too well. So they used to have the support of Iran. Today, Iran they're trying to survive.
Joining me now from the French capital is Mideast political analyst, Dr. Abdunnoor Toumi. Dr. Toumi, welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on the program.
Dr. Toumi, I want to start with the statements made by former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Now, she says that Palestinians must forget their right to existence. She has also said that the Palestinians must recognize that Israel is going to exist. Now, how does this reflect the ongoing Western erasure of Palestinian rights?
Actually, it is another statement of scornful attitude vis-a-vis the Easterners. I mean, it's too sad to hear this from a prominent academician in international relations and all her expertise on world affairs, not to mention being a strong voice and to some extent one of the brains of the U.S. foreign policy among the Republicans. I mean, having said that, she's not a dove. I mean, we all know who she is, and she's a hawk, and she's one of the, again, the thinkers of the new cons and the architects about to shape the Middle East. And we saw how this doctrine was collapsed in Iraq and Afghanistan before that. So, and again, to hear such senseless statement in light of what has been going on. And let's say it, I mean, with all these 2 years of atrocities and war crimes committed by the Israelis. So it is, again, pity to hear that. But frankly, I'm not surprised. I mean, being in the U.S., actually I was there during that time of when she was in, again, with the Bush son administration, and how her voice was strong and influential on the decision-making process that led, again, to the war, quote-unquote, on terror in Afghanistan, and to the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Dr. Dumi, Israel has also said that it will now limit the number of trucks that are being allowed into Gaza to feed the war-torn Palestinians. Now, are we surprised? Or, you know, for me, this does not come as a surprise. What's your analysis, and why is Israel now trying to limit the number of trucks that are coming into the occupied Gaza Strip? Because these were some of the conditions which were also in the Gaza peace plan.
You said it, I mean, you weren't surprised. I mean, that it's not surprised. We're not surprised. And we knew that, actually, and I think I mentioned that to you last week on this, again, on this program, that, again, this is the alibi and the pretext the Israelis, and particularly this fascist messianic government, has been looking for any opportunity to go and not explore or sabotage any ceasefire, but to implode it for good. And this is, again, just no sense pretext that, like, you know, the Israelis are looking for to go back and continue their genocide. I mean, they know they lost. I mean, strategically speaking, Hamas did win. Not only Hamas, I mean, the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people did win this strategic war, because we know how today the image of Israel in the world is, and how the world now is, I mean, has been showing its full support for the Palestinians, and how the Palestinian cause has become a humanity cause and a global cause for the entire humanity. So, but this is, again, an interesting point and a good question. But now this is the role of, on one hand, the U.S. president, Mr. Donald Trump, who has been saying that he is the main guarantor of this ceasefire or this truce. On the other hand, the role of the Arab and Muslim leaders, who have been very active, and they are very serious and to some extent are very angry about the pretexts that the Israelis are looking for just to go back and continue, quote unquote, their genocide. Even though, I mean, you heard, like me, I mean, President Trump last week, I mean, he said it clearly that the war did end, and I think he repeated it 3 times. I mean, so that the Israeli Prime Minister, I mean, in the Knesset or speech, he also declared. But this is, and again, he's not a trustworthy person, and this is, again, it's one of his and his fascist, Talmudic, messianic government strategic objective to go and reoccupy and push the Palestinians, like they were trying to do, to the desert, pardon, to the desert or to the sea, but it didn't work. And again, as a result of the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian resilience, who are not going anywhere and who are again staying, fighting for legitimate fight for statehood.
Dr. Toomey, I want to brief you on some statistics. Now, under the Biden and Trump administrations, the United States has provided Israel with over $21.7 billion. Now, that money could have been spent on education, on healthcare, on funding new projects in the United States. But the U.S. administration, both of these administrations, decided to fund the Israelis for that genocide. What are your thoughts on that? It's not a small number, $21.7 billion.
I mean, it is a huge number. And now in again, the struggle of American people at home, and we saw how, again, it was like more than 50 million Americans who didn't have health care until the Obamacare did pass in 2010. So, and now, even though, I mean, now there are some states in the U.S., I mean, who are either appealing or trying to suspend that program. It's a part of this, again, social demand and legitimate demand for the American people at home. And this I'm talking about like now more than 10 years ago. But here just recently, I mean, we saw and how the American people are, again, suffering. I mean, we saw people, I mean, struggling day in, day out for just, again, to pay their credit and their loans, I'm sorry, for their credits at students at the universities. And the families are just, I mean, the fathers and the mothers are, again, struggling to bring bread on the breakfast table. But again, it's a paradoxical approach that the American politicians, how they have this allegiance to Israel, and this is because of the Israelis' lobbies in Washington, D.C., and how are powerful on the politicians. But what happened in light of these 2 years in Gaza Strip, I mean, is shaping not only the narrative, but the profound and strategic approach of the American people, particularly among the young, who are looking differently at their politicians. And now there are a new generation is speaking up and challenging those donors and those lobbyists, and also the politicians who obey to them, and just by going like by $5 donations and make their own campaign clean and legitimate to challenge those politicians at the state level. And this will lead, of course, to serious and tough races next year in the next midterm elections.
Dr. Toomey, staying on the topic of lobbies, we know how there are certain individuals and certain groups which have been supporting the Israelis in annexations, in illegal settlements, in this genocide that we've seen over the past 2 years. And one of them is Miriam Adelson. Now, she was also there at the Israeli Knesset when Trump was addressing the Israeli parliament. He pointed at her and said that, you've done a great job. Now, Miriam Adelson's $100 million donations to pro-Israel lobbies like AIPAC fuel policies supporting occupation and Gaza's blockade. From a pro-Palestine view, what are their motives to undermine Palestinian rights, and how can global movements resist this?
Actually, their motives and their objectives is simple. It's because they have a messianic agenda in Palestine, and all those groups and this person and her husband. Her husband was one of the generous donors to the Republicans for decades. And this, it's not for the Republicans, even for the Democrats, Senate level and so on. But this is, it's a part of this dilemma in U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. And this is why sometimes on this program I said that the Americans or the U.S. doesn't have a Middle East foreign policy, because this foreign policy is based on special interests and those people who are influencing the American politicians in Washington, D.C., and how they set the agenda for their goals. And this is why Anderson, have played a major role in to transfer the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to occupied Quds Sharif, and also to, again, annex officially the higher of Golan, and showing and being generous and making huge money in the process of the settlements in the occupied West Bank. So, but this is, again, it's the equation between money and politics, and also these, those politicians who cave in to those donors as a result of, they don't have like this. I would say moral standards because, it's very hard to speak about morality in politics, but at least some, fair decencies when it comes to those thorny issues. But on the other hand, now there are, again, strong voices who are speaking up and facing those donors, as they stated, in the, state level on one hand. And also, there are now some Arabs and Muslims groups who are also starting to show their way in Washington, D.C., and playing direct role with those politicians to counterbalance this, free ride approach for the Jewish lobbies in Washington, D.C. toward the American politicians.
Dr. Toomey, obviously now we're edging closer to the second phase of the Gaza peace deal, and one of the key points in that deal is the disarmament of Hamas. Do you think that it's going to be easy to disarm Hamas because they have been fighting for their rights, they have been resisting Israeli attacks, and at the end of the day, the Israelis and Trump, both of them say that Hamas must leave Gaza? Do you think it's going to be easy to, ask Hamas or to forcibly disarm Hamas? Because President Trump has said that if they don't do it on their own accord, we are going to do it violently. So do you think that's going to happen?
It's not going to be too easy for the simple reason because the Americans and the Israelis have been fighting the Palestinian resistance in the Gaza Strip for 2 years. And I am quoting the U.S. President, Mr. Donald Trump. He said it clearly and explicitly in the Senate and in the Knesset, addressing to his best friend, the Israeli Prime Minister, that, we make the best weapons in the world, and we have given a lot to Israel. And again, I'm not going to paraphrase him when he said, you kept kind of bragging to give you more and more. So, and we saw how Gaza is today. It is wasteland. It is literally erased from the map. So, and then they go and still talking or making deals. And it's another pretext, just let's go and or ask Hamas to disarm. As I said, I think in one of your shows, as if Hamas has the Soviet Union military arsenal. So this is just another alibi and for the Israelis just to go back and to continue their carnage in Gaza, and also to divide or to buy times for the legitimate questions now the mediators, the Arab and mediators are putting on table and to some extent making pressure on the U.S. President Mr. Donald Trump to speak seriously about the right of Palestinians for self-determination and statehood, and not keep dividing the Palestinians and divide the Gaza from the West Bank as if there are two different subjects. So this is, again, what, I mean, the Israelis, they know that. So this is why they are they put this, again, pretext just to deter, to some extent, the serious and the main issue. Like now the mediators and American president to some extent also, he is pushing the Israelis to accept that it will be now they have to meet and speak and or talk seriously with the Palestinian partners for a solution about two-state in that part of the world. But again, unfortunately, and we all know that the Israelis, they don't want that, and they don't want to have a Palestinian state. And this is why, I mean, they said it explicitly. I mean, they are not hiding that. And we saw in 2018 how the Knesset did vote for Jewish state, an ethnic Jewish state. And just last year, the Knesset did vote like for no recognition, or, I mean, to not even mention Palestinians' identity by itself. So this is why now we are talking about this. Again, Hamas has to lay down its weapons, and and putting like Hamas in the core of this equation as if it's still Hamas is the problem. But this alibi doesn't work anymore, and nobody is buying it, and particularly some Westerners, I mean, Western leaders, like, for instance, Spain and Ireland and other countries, and who are saying enough is enough. And now, if we're looking about, like, Mr. Donald Trump made it last week, and we're talking about this peace, summit, or the Dawn peace, or I mean, I don't recall how he phrased it. I mean, it has to be serious, because otherwise will be translated just like the Madrid summit 34 years ago, and it's just a performance to push further. And this is what the Israelis are looking for, more normalization from Arab state and Muslim state. And this is what the Israelis are looking for, because in the end, they are not looking for peace for land or peace with the Palestinians, but for more capitulations and peace for peace. And peace from the other side for the Israelis does mean capitulations for the Arabs and the Muslims. But I believe this is not going to work as a result of, and again, the Palestinian resistance and Palestinian people resilience in these last two years, on one hand, and also it is a legitimate cause, and it has to be settled by international law, self-determination that will lead to a Palestinian state.
Dr. Abdunur Toumi, thank you so much for that analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you, sir.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.